following the event. Before we dive in, I do want to get started with a few introductory slides that will be delivered by Lindsay Miller, Account Manager at cStor. Lindsay.
Hi, thanks Kim. We appreciate everyone taking the time to join today. For those of you that may not be familiar, cStor is a technology vendor that specializes in digital transformation, cybersecurity, and data center solutions. We have been working with agencies within the state of New Mexico for over 7 years, and we were recently awarded the State of New Mexico IT Professional Services contract, which now authorizes cStor to offer many additional services that we've already been providing to our other city, county, and educational clients here in New Mexico, as well as within the state of Arizona and Nevada. The objective of this meeting today is to make you aware of some of these services now available to you through that State of New Mexico IT Professional Services contract. And with that, I would like to introduce Andrew Roberts, the cStor Chief Cybersecurity Strategist. Andrew, the floor is yours.
And good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon as we run through this. As Lindsay said, my name is Andrew Roberts. I'm cStor's Chief Cybersecurity Strategist. What that means is that I lead cStor's cybersecurity practice. I've been doing this here for a little over 2 years now. Prior to that, I came from the customer side, where for the 8 years before joining cStor, I was in charge of cybersecurity at Grand Canyon University in Phoenix, Arizona. And the way I got to that CISO role wasn't exactly a direct one, right? I started my career as an auditor, and I did that for a very long time. I am a certified internal auditor, certified information systems auditor, and certified in risk and information systems control. As I said, I did that for a number of years until Senators Sarbanes and Oxley decided to pass this wonderful law that created a bunch of opportunity for people like me, helping companies get into compliance with Sarbanes-Oxley. So that led to a long period of consulting in compliance, particularly focused on information technology. And GCU was actually my very last client, and I went in there to help them with their IT compliance aspects. And this was at the end of 2008. The market was tanking, and I had no idea as a freelance consultant where my next job was going to come from. So I talked them into hiring me full-time. My recommendation to them was to make me the director of IT compliance and let me continue the work that I've been doing as a consultant. They thought that was a pretty good idea, but the offer letter that they gave me had me listed as the director of IT compliance and risk management. And when I asked about the risk management piece, they just kind of looked at me and said, you know, compliance is kind of like security, so you can have that too. So as I started out, I already knew what security was like there, and I knew I was kind of in trouble because, I mean, when I started as a full-time employee, it was still a small college, small university, about 1,200 students on the campus. There was one dorm. The IT department was 35 people, and to make it easier to get things done, about 33 of them were domain admins. So that kind of gives you an idea where I was starting at with cybersecurity. Fast forward 8 years to when I was leaving, right? The university had grown tremendously. There were now 18,500 students on the campus, 13 dorms, 2 more under construction. The IT department had grown to about 150 people, and only 3 of them were domain admins. So we were in a much better place. But as I went along through that journey, I made a lot of mistakes along the way. And those are some of the lessons that I've learned that I now share with our clients. And I'm going to share some of those with you today as we go through. And before I dive into some of that, there is one other thing that I want to share with you. Recently, there's been a lot of our clients that have had issues with ransomware. And so we've learned a lot of things, and I've seen a lot of things in common with them. And with some of our clients, I've had some deep conversations with them because what they really wanted to know after the mess got cleaned up is how do we make sure that this never, ever happens again? And so for in all of those cases where that conversation has happened, I've drawn a similar whiteboard for them. And I want to kind of run through that with you today so that you can start thinking about some of these things before you have to figure out and answer the question of how do we make sure it doesn't happen again. When a ransomware attack happens, I would say about 80% of the time, it kind of flows in the same way, and it looks kind of like this. It starts with the bad guys out there, wherever they happen to be, using the internet to send an email to their target. All right. Sometimes these emails are specifically targeted at an individual company or agency or government. Sometimes it's just random. They get an email list and they just blast it out there and hope that somebody gets the email and falls for it. So that email ends up in somebody's inbox, right? One of your employees gets that email and they look at it. And at this point, one of two things happens. Either there was a link in that email that takes them out through the firewall and out to the internet, where that link then downloads and delivers a payload back in through the environment to the workstation. If there wasn't a link in there, then the other way that it gets in is there was an attachment, and that attachment contains malware that is installed on that person's workstation. Now, once the wet badness is installed on that workstation, it starts to work quietly for a little while, and it's doing a few things. One, it's going out and looking for other workstations in the environment, and also other servers in the environment, and it's going to infect those as well. And then once it reaches a critical number, right, and depending on the type of malware, this could be very fast, over the course of a few hours, or it might be a couple of weeks while they're infecting things. But either way, once the infection is spread sufficiently enough, then they start going out and looking for file shares in the environment and encrypting them as they go, right? So if you want to make sure, if you faced this situation and you want to make sure that it never happens again, then we really need to look at the critical failure points in this chain that allowed the ransomware to get a foothold, right? And so those failure points, there's lots of them, and I've kind of got them illustrated here. First, that email that came through the email gateway, if that email gateway didn't recognize it as a malicious email and block it, then that's certainly one failure point that needs to be examined. The obvious one is the user awareness program, because they're the one that either clicked that link or opened that attachment. So, and this is where people always see this as a need, but there's a lot more red on this slide, as you can see. Right, the web gateway that allowed that link to go out to a bad place and allowed malware to come down through the firewall was also another failure point. Another obvious one is the endpoint protection, because our victim's endpoint got infected, along with many other endpoints in the environment. But also the server protection had failed as well. And then once the encryption started, data protection failed, because the malware was allowed to encrypt all of that data. And then while all of this was going on in the environment, monitoring detection and response is another failure point, because nobody noticed that it was happening until it was much too late. So if you want to really prevent ransomware in your environment, take a look at what you have in place at all of these different points that failed in some of our clients' environments, and see and ask yourself, do you have enough in place, and is it good enough to make sure that you can block everything? It's very important to do that, and you need these layers of protection, because any one item might not be enough, primarily because none of the tools that are out there are 100%. Some are close to it, maybe some are 99% effective, but if you're 99% effective, that still means that a little bit of stuff makes it through, and that's why you need these other protections in place to catch those things that did make it through a single solution. So, back to some of the lessons that I learned as I was building cybersecurity at the university, and there were a lot of them. As I was first trying to build out that cybersecurity program and improve the security at the university, I looked at some external resources, because I had never built one out from scratch before. I'd audited plenty of security programs, so I knew kind of the elements that should be there, but I didn't know how to really put it together and build it. So I looked out at some different ways to put this together, and as I was doing all of that and making my mistakes along the way, I really was able to, at the end of it and looking back, able to identify 4 key steps that I made that really helped to push cybersecurity forward in the organization. And I really wish that I had just made these 4 steps to start with instead of the other 15 that I did that didn't help quite as much. But I want to share those with you today. So the first thing that I did is I looked at the cybersecurity frameworks that are out there and available, and I was kind of hoping to get some guidance from them. And I looked at the NIST cybersecurity framework, and I saw a few good things in there that I liked and thought would be useful, so I took those few things. I also looked at the Center for Internet Security's 20 critical cybersecurity controls, and again, I found a few things in there that I liked, so I took a couple of those. We did take credit cards, so we had to do PCI, so I kind of added that to my pile. And as a university, there were some regulations that we needed to follow, and I threw those into the pile too. And I put those together into what essentially became Andrew's framework. And in the beginning, I was really happy about that. It's cool. I've got my framework. I know what I'm doing. We've got a path, and let's get going. And we started making progress for a little while. But one morning, I was taking a shower, and I realized, if the university ever had a breach, and it was Andrew's framework that failed, Andrew was going to have a problem. And I didn't like the sound of that. And so I realized at that point that by putting together that framework of my own, I was running a risk that maybe I had left some holes in there that I didn't see, some unintentional gaps in our defenses that I just didn't see because I was using a hodgepodge of a framework. So the first lesson that I learned is that it's really important to choose a framework. There are lots of options of frameworks out there, and I've mentioned a few of them already, but the important thing is that we pick one of them and make that the foundation of the security program. That way, if you're taking it in its entirety, you know that you haven't left any unintentional gaps in there. So for us, it was the NIST cybersecurity framework. That seemed the best fit, and for a lot of organizations, it is. Now, since I still had some regulatory and some compliance things that we needed to do, like PCI, we bolted that on top of the framework rather than trying to mix it in. But that helped guide our direction to make sure that there were no gaps, and we still weren't forgetting things like PCI that we needed to do. So first step is to choose a framework. Don't make up your own. Don't patch one together, but really choose one to be your foundation for what you're doing. Then the second thing that I needed to do, and I wish it was the second thing that I did, but I had to stumble around for a little while first. But the second thing that I did that really helped get things going is I went out and I got buy-in, not only from my security team, but from the rest of the IT team, and most importantly, from the executive leadership. Because if we're really going to implement this framework and do it successfully, it's going to create a culture shift inside the organization, and it did. Cybersecurity became in the spotlight, and everybody was more aware of it. And security really became everybody's responsibility, and that's necessary for it to be successful. But to create a culture change inside the organization is hard, and there's no way you can do that without support from your executive leadership. So their buy-in is critical to make this process work. Okay. And I do also want to point out that, right, step one, that choosing the framework, that is something that cStor can help you with. It's not something that we charge for. I'd be more than happy to schedule an hour discussion with you and go through some of the options that are out there and see which one and make a recommendation as to which one might be a good fit for you and really help you make an informed decision on that. For getting buy-in from your executive leadership, we can also help with that as well. Again, it's not something we charge for. It's a short meeting with your executive team. I've got a couple of slide decks. Some of them have these very same slides in there that explains the importance of going down this path and why it's good for the organization and why they should be worried about that. I'm more than happy to schedule a meeting with the executive team, whether that's an hour or 15 minutes. We can be flexible. I know the executive leaders are very, very busy, so it's hard to get an hour, but we can do it in as little as 15 minutes if we need to. Once we've got buy-in, now it's time to really move forward and make some progress. And the optimal goal here is to map out a roadmap for our cybersecurity program so that we know what we're going to do and in what order. And in order to create a roadmap, we need two critical pieces of information. First, we need to know where we're going. And since we've picked our framework and got executive buy-in for that, we know that's where we're going. The other piece of information that we need is we need to know where we are today. And there's a really effective way to figure that out. And that's by doing a gap analysis. And by a gap analysis, I mean it's an assessment that looks at your current environment and compares it to the cybersecurity framework that you chose, right? And really takes a good, honest look at where you are today as compared to that framework. And I want to stress that part about, tying back to the framework that you selected. I know there are a lot of vendors out there that sell cybersecurity assessments, and they do. Many of them will provide useful information to you, but a lot of those assessments that are done, if they're sold as a generic security assessment, aren't going to tie back to your framework. They're really going to use that vendor's framework, and they'll be looking at what the vendor thinks is important, and it may not give you a complete picture. There may be gaps in what they're looking at that won't be helpful to you. So it's important to make sure that we're doing a true gap analysis that compares back to the framework. Now, you can do this yourself uh, and get it done. Couple of downsides to that is this does take time, and usually when they're done internally, the people that are trying to do the gap analysis also have a full-time job, and this kind of gets in the way of that, so it tends to take a lot longer to do it. It will be a little bit cheaper, but you won't get it as fast. You do have an insider look at the environment. You know what's under the covers everywhere, so that's an advantage. But by the same time, if you're doing your own gap analysis and you're looking at the same environment that you look at every day, there may be some things that you miss and that you don't realize, and there are things that you miss every day and you just don't realize it. By having a third party come in and do it, you can overcome some of those obstacles. It will be faster because, one, this is their job, so they don't have to worry about anything else distracting them. And two, the people that do these are very good at it and they're practiced at it, so they're much, much more efficient. They'll come in with an objective view. They don't have those blinders on that you might have, and they can really give you an honest outside opinion of what they see in your environment. And in a lot of cases, an outside opinion is very, very valuable, particularly when you're trying to talk up to the executive leadership, because now this is a trusted expert that's been brought in. So they may be a little bit more willing to listen to what has to be said about your environment. So either way, do it yourself or bring in a third party. Very important to get this done because this tells you where you are today. Now, cStor can help you find a partner and find a vendor that can do a true gap analysis for you against the security framework that you chose, and help you out. That is a paid engagement, and it's not something that cStor does directly. We do have partners that do it. With my auditing background, I could do a gap analysis very, very easily. It wouldn't be very hard for me. But I think there's something fundamentally wrong about a vendor coming into your environment, finding all of the holes, and then trying to sell you stuff to fill those holes. I think there's a conflict there. And for that reason, cStor will not do these directly. But we do have partners that can help out and do it. They are a complete third party. And these are companies that we have worked with for a long time. I personally have seen the work that they do, and I know they do an outstanding job. So there are options available for you there. Once the gap analysis is done, you've got those two key pieces of information. We know where we're going, and now with the gap analysis, we know where we are. And from that, you can really chart a course to better security, right? Starting out with some short-term objectives, maybe that's low-hanging fruit or things that are easy to get done. Also, it may be some of the riskiest things that are in your environment and just need to be addressed sooner. Moving to the midterm, you're getting a little bit more mature. You can really be tactical with some of the things that you're doing. You can look at the solutions that you're implementing to get to better security and make sure that they're working very well together. And then as you are becoming more and more mature, moving to the long term, it's really then you can start to be truly strategic and you can adjust your course as needed. cStor is very, very good at helping our clients come up with these roadmaps. Those clients that have done the gap analysis through us, one of the things that cStor provides as a part of that is, we're looking at the work that's being done by the people doing the gap analysis, I get to see those reports early on, and we've developed some tools where we can take the data from those gap analysis reports and present them in a dashboard format that really shows you where your highest risks are now, and we can use that to inform short-term, mid-term, and long-term goals. So this roadmap help that we provide is not something that, it is a service, but it's not something that cStor charges for. It just comes along with, if you do the gap analysis through one of our partners, we're happy to help you provide this, because we want to be there to help you execute on that roadmap as soon as we've got it ready for you. Now, one thing that's important for everybody to understand and is what we're shooting for when it comes to building a cybersecurity program. I found this chart that I'm about to show you very, very helpful when I was talking to my executive leadership, particularly around getting budget for cybersecurity. And when I showed this graph to them, it really changed the conversation that we were having about cybersecurity. You see, as you're building out a cybersecurity program and implementing cybersecurity inside your organization, if you look at the amount of risk that remains in the environment over time, it kind of looks like this curve. In the beginning, you can make some of those low-hanging fruit, easy wins kind of thing that make a very, very big impact. And then as time goes on and you get more mature, those incremental gains get harder and harder to do. So the amount of risk you reduce with each new thing gets to be less and less and less. And we always need to remember that this residual risk curve, the amount of risk in your environment, never gets to zero. There's no way to eliminate all of the risk in your environment. Now, at the same time that you're reducing all this risk, you're also spending money. There's no way to avoid that. And that money curve looks kind of like this one, where those early wins that we did, the low-hanging fruit stuff, those are usually pretty cheap because they're easy to do. But as those incremental gains get harder and harder, that also means they get more and more expensive. Now, particularly CFOs, they understand this kind of chart. They know this in their head. This is the kind of stuff they live and breathe all the time. So as a security guy, when I was going into the CFO looking for more budget, the first assumption is that I was trying to get to the far right-hand side of this chart. And they inherently know that that's also the most expensive region to be in. But what I explained to them is that, no, that's not my goal. I'm really trying to optimize the cost of cybersecurity. And if you look at the true cost of your cybersecurity program, it's not just the dollars you spend, but it's also the amount of risk that remains in your environment. That unmitigated risk is part of the cost. And if you consider those two items together to be the true cost of your cybersecurity program, then that curve looks more like this one. And if we want to optimize that, we just want to shoot for somewhere along the bottom of the curve. Now, I don't have this marked as a single spot because it's going to vary a little bit from organization to organization. If you're in a highly regulated area and you've got a lot of things that you need to comply with, you might need to shift a little bit to the right of this graph and spend a little bit more money on your cybersecurity. At the same time, other organizations might be less risk averse and are willing to fly a little bit fast and loose, and so they can shift a little bit to the left-hand side of this. But helping the executives understand that this is what we're shooting for, that optimized cost, changes the conversation and helps move things forward. So now that I've shared some of the lessons that I've learned in the past, I do want to share with you some of the other services that are available to you through cStor now that we've been awarded that contract. So let me just run through those for you. Starting with one service that's available to you is managed backups. I know backups have always been difficult for people to do. When I was at the university, we had a couple of people that was their full-time job, was to deal with backups. And even still, we weren't 100% sure that our backups were where they needed to be, that everything was being backed up, and that those backups were effective. Yes, we did a little bit of testing here and there, and hopefully things worked out for the best. Fortunately, we never had a situation where we needed to try and see if all of the backups were good. Um, but by outsourcing those backups to a team of people that where backups is what they do, it becomes much more efficient, and you can be assured that your backups are happening. They're happening when they're supposed to be, as they're supposed to be, and they're going to work when you need them to work, because these backup services include a lot of testing. You can also know that your backups are fully encrypted and will be protected as they're sitting there. So that's one service. Another thing you might want to consider is a step up from the backup as a service, and that's disaster recovery as a service. Most organizations are not experts at disaster recovery. That's because they don't have a lot of time to practice it, which is a good thing. Even the very mature organizations, they have a DR plan and they test it once a year, but even still, if something happened, they're not going to be at their peak to do the recovery. By outsourcing disaster recovery uh, to a team of people where disaster recovery is what they do, again, it becomes much more efficient, and you can be comfortable that you're going to be able to recover when you need, as fast as you need. You can have 24/7 support from them. They will do testing, making sure that they can recover applications on another site very, very quickly. Make sure that your replications are happening as they need to happen, so that if recovery is needed, it's there for you and it's there right away. Another lesson that I learned at the university is, well, there's a couple lessons from this slide. One is that there's two reasons why we might want to do a penetration test, right? The first reason is because someone's telling you you have to do one. Maybe it's for PCI, maybe it's some other regulator, but someone's telling you you have to get a penetration test. And so you're doing that test just to check the box, right? And most of the time, if you're doing a check the box penetration test, you also want to pass. So honestly, you're not that worried about how good these penetration testers are, as long as they're good at writing a report, and hopefully it's a clean report. And you may bring those same people back in if they did a good job and wrote you a good clean report. You can bring them in next time, and it's very quick, it's very efficient, and that's fine. But the other reason for doing a penetration test is to improve security. Now, when I was at the university and doing the penetration test, I had some check the box that I needed to do. I hired the same people to do it all the time. But I also wanted to improve security, so I brought different penetration testers in to do those. And their mission was to find things wrong. I did not want a clean report. And I always told them at the beginning of the engagement, if they didn't find anything, they were not going to come back. Another thing that I learned for these security improving penetration tests is it's important to rotate the penetration testers. If you bring the same penetration tester in time and time again, they're going to bring potentially the same people with the same skill sets, certainly the same toolbox, and they're going to look at essentially the same things that they looked at last time, which means they'll be just redoing the work that they did in the past. And the risk you're running there is if they missed something before, chances are they're going to miss it again. And there's not a lot of value in that. But by rotating your penetration testers, bringing in different teams with different skill sets and different toolboxes, they're very likely to see something that maybe the last guy missed. And I'm not knocking the last guy here, because nobody's going to be able to see 100% of the bad stuff in your environment. But if you're making improvements, you can just rotate through your penetration testers to make sure that you're getting a broader view and more value out of those penetration tests. I found that rotating penetration testers was a royal pain in the neck, because it's very hard to understand who's out there, and more importantly, who's good and is going to be able to give a good result. If you work with cStor, we can help you find the penetration testers that you need, and we can rotate those penetration testers for you. We have relationships with a number of different firms that do penetration testing. We work very closely with them. They assist a number of our clients, and we get to see all of the penetration testing work that they do and review all of their reports. That means we know that we've got partners that deliver a very good, high quality result that's going to help you improve security. So if you want to make that easy for you, let cStor handle the rotation of the penetration testers. You can maintain your relationship with us, and we can bring you a new penetration tester as often as you want it to be. We make that rotation very, very easy for you. cStor also has a unique offering that's available to you called a compromise assessment. What this is, you could think of it a little bit like a penetration test, but it's much, much, much more. What this is we can come into your environment and look at it from the inside, right? A penetration test would be from the outside, trying to get in. This is an assessment from the inside, looking at your environment to see where there are areas of weakness, or more importantly, if you're compromised or not. Perhaps there's a hacker in there, perhaps there's malware in there. These assessments can identify that. How they work is we'll give you some lightweight scripts that get deployed to your endpoints. These are self-dissolving scripts. They take a couple of minutes to run, and they gather some data. And that data gets shipped up to Cylance's AI cloud, where some in-depth analysis is performed against that to take a look and see what's going on in your environment. If you have malware active in your environment, this assessment will tell you that. If you have hackers active in your environment, this assessment will tell you that. It is an inside deep look, and it tells you what's going on. If you don't have active malware or hackers in your environment, if there are signs that there has been in the past, we can let you know about that as well. And even if that hasn't happened, this is still such a deep dive. We can give you lots of recommendations about improvements that can be made in your environment, whether it's certain individuals that have more access than maybe they should, or certain GPOs and configurations that could be changed to improve security in the environment. So deep dive, something to look at. There are particularly good times to run a compromise assessment. If you're the kind of organization that does penetration testing routinely, and you're rotating your penetration testers, and even still your testing comes up fairly clean most of the time, and you want to look for improvements, this will take a different look at it. So maybe you can replace one of those penetration tests with a compromise assessment. Another good time is if you've got a couple of agencies that maybe are merging operations, or certain portions of an agency transfer from one to another. Before you hook those two networks together, you can run a compromise assessment to make sure that you're not bringing in something that's compromised, another environment, and hooking it up to your network where there's some compromise. A lot of times we've seen if there's a new executive leader coming in, a new CIO or a new CISO coming into an organization, they want to take a look at their environment and really deep dive so that they can understand where the problems are early in their tenure before those problems become their fault. So those are all good times to do these compromise assessments, and you get some real value out of it, and really can find some things that make security much, much better for you. Another service available that's been very, very helpful for a lot of our clients is managed detection and response. Right, this goes well beyond just a managed SIEM. I know there are some companies out there that will manage your SIEM environment for you, but it's still up to you to look at those alerts and respond to them. This service does manage the SIEM and looks at all of those alerts, but then they go much further beyond that. One, you're getting 24/7 coverage, which I know is hard for a lot of smaller agencies, but they've got skilled engineers that are watching those alerts, and they're tuning and they're investigating to make sure that the alerts that get to you are the important ones that you really need to be looking at, and not all of the noise that gets generated. So very, very important to make your life a lot easier. I know you don't want to be woken up at 3 o'clock in the morning by a bunch of noise that really isn't important. They'll assign engineers to your account that know your environment. So if you call them during the week, during business hours, you're going to get people that really, truly understand your environment and what's important to you and what's going on in your environment. So very helpful and useful there. Another service that they have that they can add on top of managed detection and response is a managed risk platform. And what that does is it adds vulnerability management to that managed detection and response capability, where they can add a scanner to your environment. It will look for vulnerabilities, whether that's missing patches, or poor configurations, and inform you about those and let you know of areas that you can improve on. But by also feeding that back into that SOC that's watching your environment, that lets them deliver much more value in their service, because if they see an attack coming into your environment that's trying to exploit a particular vulnerability, and they know that you don't have that vulnerability, they know they don't need to wake you up for that. Or on the other hand, if they know you do have that vulnerability, you might need to be notified much quicker because they know that someone's trying to exploit a vulnerability in your environment. Really, this does help answer the question, are you safe? Because it's taking a good hard look into your environment to tell you what's going on there. Another thing that you may want to consider, given the way things happen in the world today, is an incident response retainer. These are very, very useful contracts that you can put into place that gives you on-call incident responders no matter what happens, when it happens. They are there for you. We've seen a lot of clients, something bad happens, and then it's a mad scramble to figure out who's going to help them respond, who can come in and help clean up that malware, or who can find the hacker that's infiltrated their environment. By making that decision up front, it saves you a lot of time when it really matters. And then the other thing is it also lowers the hourly rates that you need to pay for those for the response. Because after the malware strikes and half of your data is encrypted, it's not cheap to get someone to come in and help you out. And this helps control those costs. And some of those unused funds, right? If you buy the retainer and nothing happens, those funds don't go to waste. They are still available to you, and you can pivot and use those for other services. Maybe you can use the hours for a penetration test instead, and then renew your retainer for the next year. So the funds don't go to waste. One thing that, as a group of agencies you may want to consider, and is an option, the larger the incident response retainer is, the lower the hourly rate goes. So there's some cost savings from if some agencies wanted to team up together and purchase a joint IR retainer, you could do so at a lower cost. So something to think about as we move forward. If you think a retainer is a good thing for you, but think it might not be in your budget, maybe you could share one with a couple of agencies. Okay. All of these services that I've been talking about work very, very well together, and they also work very, very well independently. So the nice thing about that is we can find the right mix of services that work for you. We don't have to put together some pre-made bundle of services that may contain stuff that you don't need or want. Instead, we can tune it and focus on it so that it is the right mix of things for you. If you're in a smaller agency and looking at where to get started, maybe that gap analysis that we talked about and having someone manage your backups is a good place to start. And that'll get you down the road, and it's not going to kill your budget as you start out in the beginning. But, maybe you're a little bit more mature, or you're a little bit larger. So a slightly different mix might be better for you. Maybe that gap analysis, and I'm always going to suggest you do the gap analysis first so you know where you're going. But then adding managed detection and response in there, have some penetration testers being rotated through there for you, and still the managed backups are being done for you. Or if you're a much larger and more mature organization, or at least your security is more mature, then maybe we can have a different mix for you, where we've, still starting with the gap analysis, but doing managed detection and response with the managed risk components, IR retainers in addition to penetration testers being rotated, disaster recovery as a service, as a step up from managed backups, and then throwing some compromise assessments in there once in a while to make sure that everything is good, safe, and sound in your environment. So, and with that, I think I'm at the end. And I've got some time. If anybody has any questions, feel free to type them in the chat, and I'll give it my best to answer them.
Thanks so much, Andrew. Great information, very timely, obviously. And so we do have time for a couple of questions, and we do have questions. First question is, how long does it typically take to receive a quote for services? And I'm not sure if that would be for Neil. Any thoughts?
Well, actually, I can take it anyway. Of course, the first answer, it always starts with it depends. But what it really depends on is a little bit on the type of service that you need, because different services will require to gather a little bit more information. Typically, we can turn quotes around very, very quickly, even though it might depend. I know for a gap analysis quote, we could have that turned around. Typical is we'll turn it around in a week. If you're in a hurry, we can turn it around in 2 or 3 days. Same thing with some penetration testing. Usually those are pretty easy to scope out and get quoted, so we can take it from there. But it's pretty quick, but it does depend a little bit on what kind of service you're talking about.
Great, thank you. And the next question, a little bit related, what is the current expectation for starting services? In other words, if you got a PO next week, how long could you start the work? How long before you could start the work? What is that timeline? Can you speak to that as well?
Sure. Yeah, and I can, and I hate to say it, but yeah, it depends. And what it really depends on, particularly with the services, it's resource availability, right? If you're looking for a gap analysis or a penetration test, it depends on how busy those teams are right now. Typically, we can usually get one of those kind of engagements started in about 3 weeks on average. Sometimes it's a little bit less. Occasionally, we've seen it go a little bit longer, but not typically. Some of the other things like DR as a service, managed detection and response, and managed backups, those can get running much more quickly. They have bigger teams on their benches to get things started right away. Plus, their objective is to deliver the service to you as an ongoing thing, so they want to get it started as fast as possible. So those can get started faster.
Awesome, thank you so much. That actually concludes the Q&A portion as well. So I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us today, and of course to Andrew for all of his expertise, and to Lindsay too. And we hope to see you on another cStor event very soon. If you do have additional questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to your cStor account manager. We look forward again to seeing you on another event very soon. Stay healthy and be well.